Order. Welcome to meeting number 138 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. To all members, please wait until I recognize you by name prior to speaking. And I'd also like to remind everyone that all comments should be addressed through that of the chair. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you all for your cooperation.
And the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. The committee will resume its study today of hate-motivated violence targeting the 2S LGBTQI+ community. Before we welcome our witnesses, again, I would like to provide a trigger warning. Indeed, we will be discussing experiences related to hate-motivated violence. This may be triggering to viewers with similar experiences. If indeed at any point you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. For all witnesses and for all members of Parliament, we all recognize these are difficult conversations, and I would encourage everyone to be as compassionate as possible. At this point now, I would like to welcome our witnesses. L'Alliance Arc-en-Ciel de Québec, Dave Tremblay, Administrateur. As an individual, Zip Neufeld. Black Pride YYC, Daphne Dykehart, President and Chief Executive Officer, along with Ugo Oparadik, Communications Lead. From the Center for Sexuality, we have Pam Krause, President and Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference. In addition, Conseil Québécois LGBT,
Conseil Québécois LGBT, Bilène de Repentigny-Corbeil, co-chair.
Lastly, from the Alberta's Teachers Association, Jason Schilling, President, also joining us by video conference. Nous allons commencer par Monsieur.
We will start with Mr. Tremblay. You have 5 minutes.
Bonjour, en fait,
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today. As you said, my name is Dave Tremblay. I'm the past president and current director of Alliance Arc-en-Ciel de Québec, an organization dedicated to defending the rights and improving the living conditions of 2S LGBTQI plus people in the greater Quebec City area. Our mission is to promote inclusion, awareness, and solidarity through initiatives that foster a better understanding of the realities experienced by members of our community. We firmly believe that everyone deserves to live in a safe, respectful environment free from any form of discrimination or violence. Unfortunately, these fundamental principles are often flouted. Hate-motivated violence continues to target 2S LGBTQI+ people, profoundly affecting their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. These acts of hate take many forms: insults, physical assault, cyber-stalking, social exclusion, and even institutional violence. They are the result of a combination of deep-rooted prejudice, misinformation, and a lack of recognition of the diverse identities and experiences of our community. It's also important to say that the Arc-en-Ciel Alliance also organizes the Quebec City Pride, which was in its 20th year this year. To illustrate the rise in hate-motivated hatred towards our communities, the route of the Solidarity March had to be modified for safety reasons at the request of Quebec City Police Department due to homophobic and transphobic comments made by truckers in front of the National Assembly. This was the first time that I've ever experienced that. In response to these issues, our organization is actively working to, through campaigns and in public space, raise awareness among the general population through public awareness campaigns, promoting a positive vision of our communities. And we are working with the Quebec government, for example, on conversion therapy rather. However, our work alone is not enough. It's imperative that concrete actions be taken on a national scale to counter hate and create safe spaces for all. We recommend, among other things, with regard to federal jurisdiction, first of all, increasing training for members of Parliament on the issues faced by 2S LGBTQI+ communities so as to avoid public speeches and positions that could stir up hatred.
la mise en œuvre de
the
programmes
implementation of mandatory training programs on sexual and gender diversity in sectors under the jurisdiction of the Government of Canada, the creation of a national awareness campaign promoting a positive vision of sexual and gender diversity, propose guidelines to healthcare establishments aimed at providing support to SLGBTQIA+ people in the network in a climate of respect and trust. And of course, better funding for community organizations that support 2SLGBTQI+ people. And also the implementation of programs aimed at reconciliation between people of sexual and gender diversity and law enforcement agencies
de la pluralité de genre.
to facilitate the disclosure and treatment of crimes against them. So in conclusion, we believe that an inclusive and respectful society can only be achieved through collective and sustained efforts, and our alliance is committed to continuing its work, but we need the support of our elected officials. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Tremblay. Zip Neufeld, you have the floor for approximately 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Zip Neufeld. I am a transgender, non-binary, pansexual 12-year-old from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I use he, they pronouns. To the chair and the committee, I am here to speak to you today about the rise of violence towards the two SLGBTQIA+ communities across Canada. It is draining. Draining because politicians are using queer youth as pawns, resulting in a rise of hate and violence. Draining because this makes every day more stressful and looking towards my future, not a thought I want to think about. Draining because we are constantly forced to rise up. Why is our leadership allowing this to happen? Here's the thing. Yes, the issue of the queer community, in particular transgender rights, being under attack by several provincial governments is creating a larger problem of discrimination. This makes school environments more unsafe and allows for ignorant, bullying, and mindsets to thrive within the general public. Even a 12-year-old like myself can understand that when hateful thoughts and words are able to escalate, then violence soon follows. The way we are building our society does not give me and trans youth like myself a future. But this is only half the picture. Because I know causing these movements against 2S LGBTQIA+ community is not really these politicians' true concerns. It is a distraction. Using the debate of my human rights as a way to move the conversation away from what they are doing, or more accurately, what they are not doing, on things like the housing crisis, inflation, and lack of social supports, to name a few. Knowing your existence being debated only as a way to not talk big picture things is infuriating, especially when you care yourself about these big issues. Come on, let's focus, adults. So, to those in power who support queer youth, please, keep fighting. Please step up to stop the rise of these harmful bills. Do what you need to do so we can refocus on what matters. Please use your voice so mine doesn't need to feel so drained. To those in power who are against trans and queer youth like myself, yes, we are drained by your constant attacks, but know this. We will never back down. We will always speak up. We do have communities who love us and support us, and we will never stop until the violence against us does. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Zip. Next, I would like to welcome Ms. Dykehart. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of Parliament, and members of this committee for the opportunity to address this urgent and deeply troubling matter. My name is Daphne D.K. Hart, and I'm the founder of Black Pride YYC and Black Pride Canada. And I'm here with Ugo Oparadike, Comms Lead, representing not only the 2S LGBTQI+ community, but also the intersecting experiences of Black and queer individuals who often bear the consequences of hate-motivated violence and systemic inequities. We're here to discuss a crisis, one that is not theoretical, nor is it distant. It is happening right now in our communities, in our homes, in our schools. It is a crisis that puts the lives, dignity, and future of towards LGBTQI individuals, particularly the youth, at great risk. To frame this discussion, I would want to share a voice of a parent of a Black trans kid from Calgary. This is her story. Do you know what it's like to watch hope drain from your child's face and see it replaced with sheer panic? That is exactly what I saw when I told my 12-year-old trans daughter that Premier Daniel Smith was planning to ban gender-affirming care for people like her. I will never forget that night. Through tears, my daughter pleading, "No, Mom, no, she can't do that, can she? I can't go through that puberty. I can't. What are we going to do?" My daughter came out when she was 8. She was suicidal, supporting her social transition, and promise of accessing gender-affirming medical care saved her life. Until the Premier's recent announcement, she was thriving and happy, doing well in school, enjoying friends, and excelling at basketball. I fear that is all about to change. It already has. Medical care, safety at school, and her beloved basketball all getting ripped away because she is a political pawn. This mother's pain should haunt us all. Her daughter's story is not isolated. It is indicative of what happens when government prioritizes political posturing over the well-being of vulnerable children. These policies are not merely theoretical debates. They are life and death issues in countless families. Hate doesn't come out from nowhere. It is nurtured by harmful words, harmful policies, and failure to act against injustice by the government. CSIS has warned us about the rising threats targeting the TOS LGBTQ community. Yet we see protections in schools being taken away. Forcing teachers to out queer children to their families is dangerous, especially for the Black community, who, as a result of colonialism, are extremely homophobic and transphobic. A study done by J. Pham Psych Hall, published in the National Library of Medicine, showed that ethnic minority parents exhibited greater parental rejection of LGBTQ children than ethnic majority parents, as reported by both parents and youth. For Black and Indigenous members of the TOS LGBTQI+ community, racism makes the dangers even greater, making us targets twice over, often with less access to resources and support. This is why the TOS LGBTQI+ Federal Action Plan and National Action Plan to Combat Hate are so important, but they cannot remain aspirational. They must move from ideas into actions. Funding must be directed to grassroots organizations, mental health services, and advocacy groups that are already doing the work to support queer and trans lives on the ground. Members of this House, we are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for equal rights, for the right to live without fear, for the right to see our children thrive. When governments and institutions fail to protect their most vulnerable population, it is a failure on democracy itself. I'll leave you with this. The fight against hate is not a political issue. It is about standing up for people, for human rights, for our values as a country. It is a matter of whether we, as a country, are willing to stand by as families like the ones in Calgary live in terror, or whether we will rise to the moment with courage, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice. Let our kids live. Uphold humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dykart. Ms. Kraus, you have the floor for up to 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Pam Kraus, and I'm the President and CEO at the Center for Sexuality. The Center for Sexuality is a nationally recognized prevention-focused organization that delivers evidence-based programs and services to normalize sexuality and improve sexual health. We have been leading the way in the areas of sexuality, healthy relationships, human rights, 2S LGBTQ+ inclusion, and consent for 52 years in Calgary. We serve over 40,000 people in Alberta annually, thanks to our many partnerships with schools, community groups, health agencies, and corporate partners. Much of the center's work is school-based. Since 1975, we've been providing comprehensive sexual health education in Calgary and area schools, and we also have supports for specific populations, including programs and services for 2S LGBTQ+ individuals and communities. This includes supporting gay-straight alliances in schools, providing counseling support to 2S LGBTQ+ youth and their families, and annually we host Camp Firefly, a leadership camp for 2S LGBTQ+ youth in partnership with the YMCA of Calgary. An increasing number of discriminatory comments, policies, legislation, and bylaws are occurring across the country, particularly as it relates to non-binary or transgender youth and adults. We have seen it at the national level in New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and even in local municipalities. This is impacting the human rights and safety of a very vulnerable group of Canadians. Hate crimes directed at the 2S LGBTQ+ community have dramatically increased as confirmed by Statistics Canada. There are many factors, but undoubtedly the relentless targeted attacks on social media against the transgender community has led to increased hate crimes. Online platforms play a central role in this and has contributed to real-life violence. One of the most important ways to combat the targeted attacks against 2S LGBTQ+ communities is to create safe spaces and create awareness through education. Schools play a pivotal role in this. There is proposed or passed legislation in several provinces which does not allow students to change their pronouns and names at school without parental consent. The reality is that school may be the only safe space for 2S LGBTQ+ youth who are struggling to come out and are concerned about family acceptance. Youth often have to take the time to be okay with themselves before they can come out to those they love. In our work with thousands of youth we know, most queer youth want to come out to their family. The first question we commonly get is, how do I come out to my parents? But it isn't always safe, and knowing you have a community of support matters a lot. Provincial legislation that creates an environment where youth will not be able to have safe spaces in their schools will definitely lead to negative consequences. The safety of school environments for 2S LGBTQ+ youth does not diminish the essential role of parents in the lives of their children. The role of the Centre for Sexuality is to provide support and education for parents to help them process what their child is going through, give them opportunities to connect with other parents in the same situation, and to find ways to provide support, even when they are confused and struggling. We also work with the youth, and this commonly leads to better outcomes for the entire family. The federal action plan was a great step forward, but it's by no means a permanent solution. The focus on community action and coordinating 2S LGBTQ+ issues across government departments are important steps, but these efforts need to be implemented and sustained to be successful. The grassroots organizations such as the Centre are working to address the root causes of violence targeted at the 2S LGBTQ community. However, we require resources to scale up our programming. Expanding the reach of community programming is an opportunity for the Government of Canada to create generational change and push back on the harmful narratives that persist. Long-term positive change can only be accomplished if government and community organizations work together and are committed to long-term, sustained change. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, today.
Thank you, Ms. Krause. Next.
Next, Ms. de Repentigny-Corbeil, you have 5 minutes. Madam Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. My name is Mylène de Repentigny-Corbeil, and I'm co-president of the Conseil Québécois LGBT, an organization that federates over 82 SLGBTQI+ organizations throughout Quebec. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today. For several months now, threats to roll back the rights of our communities have hovered over our heads like increasingly opaque shadows. Right now, in several Canadian provinces, proposals to roll back policies for the inclusion of 2 SLGBTQI+ youth in school are being considered. Recently, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service issued a warning about the threat of extremist violence from anti-LGBTQ+ movements. At the Council, we witness on a daily basis the repercussions of this hatred. which erodes our sense of safety and jeopardizes the well-being and dignity of our communities. Our network is rich, committed, and diverse. It includes activists who have spent the last few decades fighting for gay marriage, for the right to start a family, work and study without fear of discrimination, for the right of trans people to have identity documents that reflect who they are, and the list goes on. These people were able to celebrate the legal advances achieved thanks to their determination and complete dedication to the cause. Today, however, these people are telling us that for the first time in their lives, they're witnessing a change in direction. For several months now, and for the first time in recent history, the trend has been one of retreat rather than progress. At the same time, data shows that violence, bullying, and hate speech against our communities are on the rise as never before, both online and offline. We are deeply concerned to see how dangerous and hateful discourse manages to infiltrate and influence public policy. And this is what we're currently observing in Canada. Member organizations of the Quebec LGBT Council are reporting disruptions and insults at awareness-raising workshops in schools. Some are being forced to deactivate comments on their social media in the face of the outpouring of hate messages. Rainbow flags are being ripped up, trampled, and torn. Demonstrations are organized and held to attack the rights of trans and non-binary people, and the situation continues to worsen. Hateful and dangerous rhetoric circulates freely in the political and media spheres, both abroad and at home. And what we're seeing on a daily basis is that information and fake news are wreaking havoc, feeding moral panics based on hearsay and rumors. And gradually, the sexually and gender diverse have become the scapegoats, singled out as responsible for all society's problems. As a reminder, last year, there was far more talk about co-ed toilets than about the fact that thousands of qualified professionals are lacking in our schools. In the past year, reports broadcast by trusted media outlets have promoted anti-trans theories unanimously denied by the scientific community. Online, influencers are racking up millions of views on videos promoting overtly misogynist, racist, homophobic, and transphobic rhetoric. Everyone's on board. The problem is multifaceted and is proliferating on all platforms. What I've talked about today is no longer anecdotal. It's a crisis that calls for decisive political action. The Canadian Action Plan to Combat Hate and the federal 2S LGBTQI+ plan are essential tools for coordinating the response to this crisis. But their implementation must be swift, determined, and accompanied by further action if necessary. Community organizations need active support to meet the growing demands of 2S LGBTQI+ communities. Canada needs better oversight of digital platforms to combat misinformation and online hate that lead to real violence. We must also continue to ensure increased monitoring of hate crimes, considering the specific impact they have on 2S LGBTQI+ communities. We are counting on your help to reverse this trend. Thank you for your attention and support, which are fundamental in these difficult times.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Schilling, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, good afternoon, members of the committee, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about the recent legislation that will harm our most valuable students. My name is Jason Schilling, president of the Alberta Teachers Association, representing over 46,000 public school teachers, and I'm joining you today from Edmonton, located on Treaty 6 territory. In my submission today, I may use the term gender diverse along with the act.
We have a point of order in the room.
Okay, thank you.
The room because there's an echo when I use my earphone.
Okay, cool. Madam Clerk, can we turn up the volume in the room?
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. So, Mr. Schilling, I did pause your time during the point of order, so you can. Are we ready to begin?
Oh, yeah, I'm ready. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. In my submission today, I may use the term gender diverse along with the acronym 2S LGBTQIA+ to recognize and affirm the wide range of gender identities, expressions, and family structures present in schools and classrooms across our province. Alberta's Education Act requires teachers to provide welcoming, caring, and inclusive environments that foster diversity and belonging for all students. Recent changes to legislation, however, undermine this mandate by compelling teachers to disclose students' gender identities without their permission. This new legislation is deeply harmful to gender diverse children and youth. Disclosing a student's gender identity to their parents and guardians without the student's consent can result in family rejection, abuse, or homelessness. Research shows 2S LGBTQIA+ youth are 4 times more likely than their peers to attempt suicide. In jurisdictions where similar legislation has passed, suicide attempts among trans and non-binary youth have increased by 72%. Recent Canadian research has found that up to 40% of homeless youth in Canada identifies gender diverse, with identity-based family conflict being a significant factor in their homelessness. These alarming statistics must serve as a wake-up call, not just for teachers and school leaders, but for the public and all levels of government. Gender diverse youth are already at significant risk, with their struggles already well known, and it's confounding that our provincial government is going out of its way to punch down on gender diverse youth. Instead, they should be investing in policies and programs to affirm and support the health and success of all students. Our gender diverse students know about the changes to this legislation. They know their pronouns and their chosen names could be revealed without their consent, and this significantly reduces their safety at school. My teaching colleagues and I are deeply concerned by these changes and fear that they will result in the erosion of trust between teachers and students. Trust is the foundation of a safe learning environment. Another concerning element to the recent legislation is the requirement for all parents to opt in for their children to participate in any discussions concerning human sexuality and gender identity. Previously, there was an opt-out option for parents. This new requirement does not address current problems. Instead, it causes a chilling effect that ultimately risks excluding students from vital conversations about identity, belonging, and sexual health. When teachers cannot discuss 2S LGBTQIA+ identities, it sends a message to gender diverse students that they should be ashamed of who they are, that they are a problem that needs to be fixed, ignored, or ushered back into the shadows. We want every student to know, especially those who identify as gender diverse or have family members who do, that we support them. Research shows an inclusive curriculum improves school climate and contributes to student belonging and success. Finally, I want to highlight the concerns about gender policies in school sports. Participation in extracurriculars provides students with a vital sense of belonging, helps them feel valued, and fosters their personal growth and confidence. Ensuring fair and inclusive access and participation is essential. Yet the Alberta government has enacted legislation that restricts access to these activities without providing the thoughtful and nuanced approach that is required. This legislation has already resulted in trans and non-binary youth withdrawing from school clubs and sports, which risks isolating them further. As a teacher for more than 25 years, I've supported countless students through challenging times. The first question I always ask them is, "Are you okay?" And sadly, in my career, I have students who are not, and I have lost several to suicide, and this breaks my heart. As educators, my colleagues and I are committed to ensuring that every student has the opportunity to thrive in an environment that celebrates their worth and potential. We must build a future where learning is not overshadowed by fear or rejection, but illuminated by compassion, acceptance, and opportunity. We are at a pivotal moment, and we need to ensure classrooms remain safe spaces for all students, that schools have the resources to support gender diverse students, their teachers, and their families. We can do better. We must do better, because if we do not, then we have failed our students, their teachers, and their families. And make no mistake, this legislation in Alberta will hurt our most vulnerable students and their families. It already has. It takes away their right to privacy. It has caused fear and uncertainty, and it undermines the very principles of inclusion, respect, and safety that our schools should stand for. I'm proud that the Alberta Teachers Association remains steadfast in its commitment to protecting the rights and the well-being of all students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schilling. At this point, I would also like to acknowledge, Mr. Schilling, that you can anticipate a call from IT just to do a sound test for you prior to us going into questions. At this point, thank you all for your opening remarks. We will be moving to our first round of questions. Dominique, vous avez la parole pour...
Dominique, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all of you for coming here today. And a special greeting to our young witness here today. You have a lot of courage. You speak well, so congratulations. So, Ms. Bilen, thank you for being here. I listened to all the testimonies, and your group, or what I caught something in your presentation caught my attention. We all are aware that CSIS, put out an alert, and you talked about a threat of extremist violence. So, what are you hearing when you're hearing? What do you think? What does extreme violence mean to you? What do you think of when you hear that term? What kind of events are you talking about? Thank you for your question and for your kind words. I think we're seeing this extreme violence both in line and offline. So hateful speech, hateful comments that dehumanize us. And there's a desire to make us invisible, reduce us, and no longer recognize us. So it's an extreme form of violence that's both physical and online. And the violence online is quite telling.
C'est pas ça du tout, mais pour bien comprendre.
I just want to understand what we're talking about. Do you have any examples or to illustrate what you're talking about? What exactly are we talking about? Yes, I can talk about hateful comments and violent comments against our association's members. And I'm not going to say what they're saying, but people asking us to take our lives, to no longer exist. And these are comments from online and offline. And so there's a real hatred, both from society and from various groups that are refusing our right to exist. These are comments that some of our members have had their rainbow flags taken away from them by force and death threats. So I mean, in any case, any threat, any hatred is illegal. Could you give us a definition
L'assentiment de tout un chacun sur ce qu'est.
That summarizes what hatred is about? Okay, what is hatred? Well, we've thought a lot about, the issue of rights. And what are the roots of this hatred? I think there's a continuum. It's the desire for the other person to no longer exist, that they can't be, that their identity is endangered.
On le témoigne dans un très grand continuum.
And we see it as a continuum. It can be from comments on Facebook to verbal violence in the street.
Travailler là-dessus sur avoir quelque chose.
I think that we have to work on this. We'll need something specific because everybody can have their own definition of that term. All right. Thank you, Ms. Milan. I really liked your comment. There were 25 femicides in this year so far in Quebec, and the year hasn't ended. I find this very concerning. This rise of violence. Mr. Tremblay, thank you for being here. Now, you're not the first one to talk to us about problems with victims and the relationships that they have with the police. And police do a great job, but victims are saying that it's not always easy. So being part of the LGBTQ community, does that make it more difficult to communicate with police, to be heard by police, to be understood by police?
Partout dans
Because in police and throughout society, understanding is important. It's important to understand what this community is, what its profile is. But is it more complicated? Well, thank you for your question. And so, yes, unequivocally, yes, it is more difficult for people from the 2SLGBT community. So now trans identity and homosexuality were a crime until 1969, and there are still scars from that experience. And we still see, that the police do good work today in Quebec City, but I understand the reticence of the hesitation of some people who experienced traumatic events.
Une activité qui était faite par la Fondation.
Now, there was an action that was done on conversion therapy, and the police officer involved in that said, after taking that session, was that he didn't know that conversion therapy was illegal. So that's a bit concerning. If that person had received or had received somebody who had undergone conversion therapy and had rejected that person because he didn't have the information, I think so. I think there's work to be done in that regard. Okay, thank you. And there are our last protection against hatred.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses, for your testimony. My question starts, I'll start from Ms. Dykert. We heard about the social media. Media contributed to the amplifying of hate and sometimes extremism in Canada, particularly against vulnerable groups like 2S, LGBTQI+, and communities. Can you explain on that, how?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think that it is evident when you go through social media and see the type of comments that you get when you post, for example, same-sex relationships. You have people who use anonymous pages commenting right underneath with very gruesome words. How about we get men to the R word, 5 men to take the lesbianism out of them, and living your life going through social media, going through comments like that, puts you not just in a difficult mental space, but also a difficult physical space, because you don't know what your safety is outside. Are they actually going to do it if you step out of your house? That's the kind of hate that we face as to us LGBTQ people in Canada in general, not just in Calgary, right? You also have people commenting about murder and things like that. And when you have one person have that comment under your page, when other people see it, especially if it's people who also have that kind of sentiment, they have the, the courage to now go and enact on it, right? You have people when you walk on the streets, even during Pride, people walked up to us this Pride, and somebody walked up to us and said, oh, that group, I hope you guys die, something like that, and just walked away. This was just randomly, and obviously we don't know who that person is, but that is somebody that if he gathers 10 other people who have the same beliefs as he does, he can easily cause harm to us, and we're female, right? So I think that it's very easy for us to acknowledge that this hate exists, but what are we going to do about the hate is really what our stand is.
How can education and social programs can be, restructured to disrupt these pathway and, can used as awareness?
Yes, I think when it comes to education, one of the things that help is a lot of the times, like I said, hate is not something that comes out of the vacuum. It's something that is taught, right? And so when you educate the public about, hey, we existing doesn't, we can exist the same way you can exist. The only difference is in how we choose to love, right? So if you educate the public in that line, then they understand that we are as human as they are, and they can create space for us to exist and be in our authentic forms. But when they don't have that education, especially for kids and young adults who grow up in environments that are with those kind of restrictions, they go outside and feel like, okay, people from the LGBTQ community are aliens, and they come up and they grow up like that because that's the household they grew up in. So education, in that sense, helps to make us as human as possible in their eyes, and that way we all can just live in harmony because we're really just trying to exist with the same rights as they have.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. Schilling, Alberta Teachers Association. In light of recent policy change in Alberta, what do you see as the biggest challenges for educators in ensuring the success and well-being of transgender students in the province?
Well, thank you for the question, and I hope that the sound is better now for the interpreters with that. So, I mean, education is really going to be the key factor there. We need to ensure that our students have the access to instruction around human identity, sexual identity, and gender identity. And one of our fears and our concerns is with part of Bill 27, which is the legislation that just passed last week, is that there's going to be an opt-in version for instruction around those elements, around sexual orientation and gender identity. And by doing this, it's going to cause a bunch of red tape that's going to get in the way of having students get this valuable instruction that they're going to miss out. Currently, under the Education Act, parents can opt out. We already have a system that's in place. We already have a system that is working. Teachers and school boards have both pushed back on government saying we don't need this opt-in version to instruction on human sexuality because we already have a system in place. When people miss out on this sort of valuable instruction that happens in schools, they don't get information that they need to know about consent, for example. I've talked to some folks who have trans children, and they say, they have other students who they talk to, where through the instruction that they get at school around human sexuality and sexual identity, they're learning that, in fact, I probably have been abused, and they need this information because we know that knowledge is power, and so we need to ensure that all of our students can get the valuable information that they need through instruction. So one of our concerns is this opt-in. Another part of Bill 27 that I didn't mention in my opening comments is now we have to get all third-party materials vetted through government as well. Again, something that has already been happening in the course of instruction here in Alberta, but it just adds another level and another opportunity for us to see materials sort of get censored before they get into schools that could help students.
Député Adrienne Larouche, vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Larouche, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank all the witnesses for participating today.
Effectivement, je confirme.
Zip, and I repeat that you spoke very clearly, so thank you very much.
Merci.
I also see Jason and Pam. Thank you very much. So in my first round of questions, I'm going to start with
Mylène de Repentigny-Corbeil.
Mylène de Repentigny-Corbeil. You talked a lot about hateful speech online, but offline as well.
Il n'y a pas suffisamment de...
So the fact that there is not enough legislation to monitor the limits, what are the consequences of the lack of legislation? And should we think, while keeping freedom of speech in mind, should we determine where things become criminal, what police can do? So thank you very much for your question. Yes, I think that it's a multifaceted problem. So yes, there's a question of access to justice. We need bills to do that. The law is not adapted or tailored to new legislation. It can't deal with deep fakes and so forth. So the legislation hasn't caught up yet with those forms of violence. But there's access to justice, but there's also a whole host of other resources and programs that are needed to accompany the victims and to work on creating awareness and preventing this violence. And I'm thinking in terms of digital literacy, what's happening online, controls. Having a conversation with online platforms, there needs to be more legislation in that regard. Your colleague was speaking about the link between women and LGBTQ plus communities, and we see this. This masculinist speech, misogynist speech, also often goes along with homophobic speech as well. These are ideologies that are proliferating on the web, and there's less space that it's safe for LGBTQ plus. So there's almost no more safe spaces. So the threat is real. And so I think we need to have education on sexuality and also education about digital literacy. This is a huge phenomenon.
On pourra peut-être y revenir. Mais...
All right. Well, maybe we can come back to that. But I also understand that IA and deepfake are contributing to the problem, and that we need new legislation not only on those new technologies, but at the limits as well for hate speech, and that could be important here at the federal level. So we'll look at that. Dave Tremblay, I'll continue with you. You talked about the question of conversion therapy, and you also talked about, when we met during the festivities in Quebec City. It's always a great event. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to the symposium that you organized on conversion therapy. Is it that event that you're talking about? Yes. So I've had a few conversations with Emergence since that symposium, but yes, there is new federal law, but it's difficult, or that some religious communities can kind of go around that law and to continue offering conversion therapy. So you talked about, so there's two parts of my question. So the importance of creating awareness in the judicial system, and also finding tools to be better able to intervene and to kind of find those religious communities that are getting around the law with regard to conversion therapy. So there was a symposium in Quebec City, and we were looking at, so there was a person called Gabrielle Nadeau who had undergone conversion therapy, and his story is very touching. Sorry, it was a book that he put out, and it's a very interesting book. So yes, we have to approach religious communities and make them aware of Canadian legislation, Quebec legislation, to make sure that their practices don't contravene the legislation, but that there are also sanctions as well that can be enforced. So that's part of the issues of enforcing the legislation, with police, and they have to have maneuverability so that they can conduct investigations into spaces that can offer that type of service.
Thank you. MP Kazan, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming today. And I wanted to start with you, Zip. So some leaders, like a lot of the great leaders of our time, Greta Thunberg comes to mind, right? They're actually younger folks that are pretty wise and provide a lot of guidance. And I try and be a good ally. That's important to me. Human rights are important to me. But you said something in your testimony, and I'm wondering if you can help me understand it better. And you said, like, don't make this a political issue, right? So can I tell you quickly what my conflict is? So because I want your advice, okay? So people are making it a political issue, like you brought that up. You spoke about legislation that's being put forward. I know that you testified in front of the Saskatoon City Hall and made these profound statements, including this one, right? Because I'm a big fan. Okay. You said, I deserve to age without fear that the bathroom and change space that allows me to feel safe and at peace will be taken from me. You said, when trans adults thrive, trans kids survive. That's profound, right? And very wise. What do we need to do as elected officials or not do to make sure that you survive?
Sorry. I'm trying to think for a second.
Yeah, take your time.
So, generalizing what you asked was that.
Like why you see your existence up for debate all the time in political spaces.
Yes.
How can I be a better ally? How can we be better allies to you to make sure that you survive?
Well, personally, I think that if you are an ally, you should speak up with us. Being a better ally wouldn't be like watching us speak. It would be speaking with us, personally. And it would help us not have to think so much about our future and how the government is working right now. Having allies would make us feel less like everything's directed on us.
Like all you want to do is go to school, right?
Yes.
Right? You just want to go to school. I heard you. I never begged to go to school, but I did hear you begging to go to school tomorrow for your science project. Is it a science project?
Yeah. We have some time to work on a science project, yes.
Yeah. So when you say speak up with us, what does that look like to you? When you say, oh, I want you to speak up with us, what does that look like?
Speak up with us as in if I was sitting here, like I am right now, you would be speaking as well about similar stuff, speaking about trans rights and the rights of just being human. Speaking up in a way that we can also take a break, but also taking our words as well to make it more vibrant.
Yeah.
That's a good word.
I think I was a teacher. I used to be a teacher. I don't know how I ended up being a teacher because I used to hate school. I'm just telling you the truth here. But one of the things that was really important to me when I was a teacher is that I provided safe space for my students. Does school feel safe for you right now? Does your school, because I was happy to hear you begging to go to school, but what does school feel like?
Right now?
Yeah. You don't have to answer if you don't want to.
I do.
Okay.
It's just hard. I love my class. They're very inclusive, and they're wonderful. And yet, people from other classes are cruel. And speaking from experience, I've had a friend that was threatened to be followed home for expressing themselves, which is really hard to think about. And as an openly trans person with my parents, it's harder to see my friends who aren't able to talk to their parents go through that by themselves.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that. And, you know, because, you know, anybody around the table, they know I ask a million questions. I'm like, back when dinosaurs were still here, there was a show called Matlock, and he was a lawyer, and he'd ask all these questions, right?
Thank you so much, Leah.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Zip. Michelle, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. You know, Zip, I see you and I see your mom behind you, and there's an innate human want where we just want to belong and feel included, and we don't want to feel different. But ironically, it's our difference that makes us so special. And school is not a great place for a lot of kids. You know, kids who learn differently, it's hard. It's really, really hard. And I just want to say, I appreciate you being here. You're young and you're brave and you're courageous and you got some support around you, which is important. But I think everyone in this room remembers everything that happened to us in those first 8 years of our life in elementary school, but don't really know where our car keys are because it's our most formative part of our life. So thank you for sharing your stories. I want to dive in, if I can, to Mylene, because I think the key in all of this is ensuring that we have legislation so there are consequences in place against hate crimes so that they aren't happening. And one of the things that we've seen repeatedly, Stats Canada released a crazy historical press release here today. 34% of all homicides were committed by a criminal who was out on bail or another form of release. That's historical numbers. And in Peterborough, we had a hate crime that went pretty public and pretty national that I was a part of as well in terms of standing up for this person. It was a pride flag burning, homophobic slurs lead to hate crime arrest in Peterborough. And the man who was charged was out violating his probation and violating his parole. And we know that C5 and C75 are two pieces of legislation right now in the House of Commons that are contributing to violent repeat offenders out committing crimes. My question to you, Mylene, is where do you see, would you like to see those bills altered, pulled back, and would you like to see stronger bail reform so that hate crimes have consequences tied to them?
Oui, désolée, j'attendais la fin de...
Sorry, I was waiting for the end of the interpretation. Yes, thank you for your question.
En effet, un besoin de...
I think there is a need to implement legislation that is much more inclusive and that includes more forms of violence. I always like to think that the next victim is still alive and we can still save that person. And we're talking about extreme violence here, so murder, but it's a very big umbrella term. There's also violence that starts, with online comments, right up to violence. So I think we have to understand that umbrella of violence.
Manière de contrer.
And there are many ways of countering that violence. So yes, there is the legal aspect of things, the criminalization of things, but there's also awareness and education before these things happen, so that people can understand that our rights and we have our place and we have a right to exist.
But I guess my question is, if you're familiar with, and I know we had talked about sort of images that are being shared online, the hate, the scary stuff. In Justice Committee, we're hearing about sextortion. There are terrible things. There is a bill, it is C412. I would love you to have a look at it, where they're holding social media companies. It's a conservative bill by a conservative colleague, Michelle Rempel-Garner, holding social media companies accountable for hate. And I think if we start there, you know, we've seen a 251% increase in hate crime took office, and I'm curious what you think would be the reason behind that, Mylene.
Je connais pas exactement les projets de loi, mais je vais
I
les
don't know
lire
the bills that you're talking about, but
avec grand plaisir.
I will go and read them for sure. The reality is, you know, when we're talking about the sharing of non-consensual sharing of images, violence online, those phenomena exist, and they're spreading. So it starts with comments, to deep fakes, to discrimination by algorithms. There are so many issues that are related to this violence, and the legal system is not adapted to deal with those many forms of violence. And then, is criminalization the solution? I don't know. But so you mentioned different types of, you know, the percentage of cyber harassment, and 60 high number of people are reporting non-consensual sharing of images. So it does affect LGBT communities, and so we have to deal with digital literacy as well.
MP Hebner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. Zip, I was also so impressed with your opening statement. I was blown away, like my colleague Leah says, with your wisdom and your insight, particularly when you said that politicians are using your human rights to deflect from other crises. And so you're in Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan recently brought in Bill 137. So that requires that parents give consent for students to use their preferred name or pronouns. And it restricts sexual health education by requiring parents to consent to that as well. So my question to you is, if a gender diverse kid can't express themselves or speak to anyone confidentially at school, and they can't do that at home, where do you go?
That is a good question, yes. With my friends, we have a group where we just talk to each other. Either it's at recess or while we're working. We try and be as inclusive in our class. I love my class in that way, where if somebody wants to use preferred pronouns, they will. It's just they won't tell the teacher about that, because it's important that a child can feel safe with their friends and in anywhere really. And since that's being taken away, it's especially important.
And the province said it would use the notwithstanding clause, which shows that the provincial leaders know that it's going to be violating human rights. So they're using that in advance to push it through regardless. Thank you for that. Pam Krause, it's great to see you again. We met in Calgary. I was there for the Pride festivities. I was so impressed with your organization, your Camp Firefly, and all that you do to support youth in the Calgary area. When I was there at the time, the community was really concerned about this new legislation coming in Alberta. And since then, it's passed. So I'd like to hear from you an update about what you're hearing from people in your circles.
Thank you so much, through the chair. You know, it's been a very difficult time, there's no question. I think, you know, we should all just listen to Zip, quite frankly. There's an immediate and there is a serious consequence when we think about legislation that's less inclusive. And I think now that this legislation is passed, I think we immediately see a chilling effect. And there's concern among teachers, among parents, and among students about what schools and what support for transgender youth is going to look like moving forward. So, you know, I think one of the most important things we can do together as adults is to pay really close attention, find those immediate supports, as Zip talked about. Sometimes it's informal. I think it provides an opportunity for community organizations to really lean into what we're meant to be doing, is to ensure that in the grassroots way that we're providing that support. But I think that we're going to see some consequences that are going to be have to be addressed, and I don't want to think about what those are going to be, but I know it can be pretty serious. So I really believe that organizations like the Alberta Teachers Association, as well as community organizations, as well as other advocacy groups, are just going to have to really fine-tune our game and really provide not just the support, but real strong advocacy work moving forward.
A lot of your work surrounds sexual health education. Why is that such an important piece in cutting back on the hate that we're seeing against the 2S LGBTQI+ community?
Thanks again through the chair. So, I think other people have talked about this. The very important thing is that everybody gets information, everybody gets education, so that people can learn how to be inclusive. The work that we do in schools is really to provide a safe space for everyone. And I truly believe, from the experience of our organization, when you provide a safe space for one vulnerable group, you are actually opening the door for others to feel safe as well. There's a tone that can be set by inclusion that I think is really, really important. The other thing is about sexual health education is the focus that we provide is helping everyone to have healthy relationships. And there's an outcome of that. I think people are less likely to bully people online when they understand healthy relationships and the consequences of their actions. So sexual health education is broad. It is meant to provide inclusive, and it's meant to provide people with ways that they can be better community members, better citizens, and better support to other youth and adults as they grow up. So it's vital education that my strong belief is shouldn't be part of any sort of political rhetoric at all.
Thank you. Deputy LaRouche.
MP LaRouche, you have 2.5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again. Again, thank you to all the witnesses. This is really rich, and it helps our conversation. So 2.5 minutes is not a long time. I'd like to ask my first question to Mylène de Repentigny-Corbeil. So in your opening statement, you talked about misinformation and anti-trans theories. Can you tell us a little bit more about those? Yes, there is a movement, and I think you've seen this. It's happening across the country, a movement to deny the existence of trans people, and that is asking for those people not to have access to rights and not be allowed to live fully. I think it's a movement that's both online and offline, that we're also seeing that they're demonstrating and they're participating in misinformation. They're talking about gender affirming surgery, false ages. They're participating. So they're feeding information, misinformation, and they're feeding hate speech toward these communities. So this group is criticizing sexual education and education about relationships, emotional life, consent, recognition of identity. And so sexual education is also being attacked by these groups.
Dave Tremblay, est-ce que vous observez?
Dave Tremblay, are you seeing this as well when you organize your events? Are you seeing the consequences of misinformation and of these theories, these anti-trans theories? Yes, absolutely. We often hear about gender theory, as if it's something that doesn't exist. So there's a desire to diminish the existence of people to a theoretical question, but it's not the case. We can't get in, everybody has the right to live as they want. And gender is defined by anthropologic, a host of factors. So we shouldn't be invalidating gender by calling it a gender theory. So this is things that we hear regularly when we organize events, and when members are telling us about this as well. They tell us about the concerns, things that they're seeing in schools. So it is very concerning, yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My next questions are for you, Daphne Dykart. You indicated you're a parent of a 12-year-old trans daughter.
I read a story,
Okay.
a letter to the committee from a parent
Okay.
of a 12-year-old trans
Okay.
kid. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you the question because I know that there's this whole debate around parental rights, and there's also the rights of the child, which we've signed on to, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yes. I think I would bring it to my community, the Black community. When you look at the rights that the child has, especially with these new laws that are being signed in, it's very hard. How many Black kids who are trans can walk up to their parents and say, "Hi, Mom, this is how I'm feeling." If you don't go to conversion therapy, you're probably going to go for deliverance, or they're going to send you to Africa or something. I don't know. That's the kind of experience that we have. And so kids especially are very afraid, especially when they're coming from that kind of household that is, in that box of this is probably you're learning it from TV. It's not something that you are, and they keep hearing that. The only place that used to be safe for them was school,
right,
where they could affirm who they are. And now they're being forced. Parents are being, or teachers are being forced to out them. You also have kids who, for example, were on sports teams, like the 12-year-old kid I spoke about, who is probably not going to be able to play basketball anymore. And she was really hoping to get into the WNBA. So that dream is taken away from her, and she doesn't have a say, and she thinks that, Daphne is going to wave a magic wand and everything would be okay. But our hands are tied. This is the reality of it when it comes to, the actual trans kids, because without this support, without them being able to medically transition or stop puberty, some of them are willing to commit suicide. So we need to be careful.
And Zip, you seem like you have a pretty amazing mom, right? How has that made a difference? How has that made a difference? In what ways do you think parents could be, that maybe aren't like your mom, could be supported to be more like your mom?
Well, my mom is amazing. And my dad. And I think that a way that you could make your child feel more safe to come out to you is to be inviting. Don't randomly go, "Oh, don't become trans," and that random stuff, because that's not inviting at all. It's when I came out, I first told my mom because she showed me somebody that she thought that they reminded of me, who was non-binary, and that invited me to come out. I think that you should just be with your child as they go through stuff. Just be with them as they do their growing up.
And it seems seems really simple, but it's really hard for a lot of folks, eh?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Dominique, vous avez la parole pour 5
Dominique, you have 5 minutes. I'm looking at the mom sitting behind Zip, and it's really moving. Your eyes are very expressive.
Tells a lot, and yes, I would appreciate to hear you about your experience as well. Madame Mylène.
Mylène, is all of this, does this all stem from ignorance and misunderstandings? You know, we say that there's a lot of violence on social media. And you said, you know, everybody's thinking about this, but if we really want to understand the LGBTQ plus community, isn't there also ignorance? And how can we combat that ignorance concretely? You know, it's great to have policies, but you know, there's a lot of community organizations on the ground. Mr. Tremblay represents some of them as well. But how do we go about it? How do we fight ignorance or this lack of understanding? Yeah, I think there is a lack of education. So I think there are so I think we need to, first of all, to disseminate quality information. When people have understandable information that's thorough and that has data, most of the public will understand. So we have to, and people aren't acting in bad faith. So that's the first thing. Second is awareness. We need campaigns. We need to speak to people. We need to have a dialogue on these concepts. And we have to counter these echo chambers that exist. We have to speak to, everyone has to speak to each other. So we need campaigns. And the third is education. So this has to be done with youth. So as a start, but we also need to educate the public in general. So access to training, digital literacy, sexuality, gender identity, and how to counter misinformation. How do we detect it, and how do we have access to these platforms so that will help us. Thank you. My time is limited here. Mr. Tremblay, in the workplace, is that no? I'm very happy because I tabled a bill, C-368. It's very short. It talks about giving people more time to table grievances in case of harassment. I did the same thing in Quebec when I was a minister there. But somebody Monday was telling us that workplaces are complicated settings as well. So what would you have to say? Is there a proliferation of problems in the workplace? Yes, you're right to raise that issue. We have received funding from the government that will target specifically employers in the workplace. So there will be a conference. So we can talk about positive experiences. So, you know, on one side, I'm hearing people saying that the transition is going well, but I'm also hearing that some people have lost their job. You know, I worked at the Human Rights Commission, and I dealt with discrimination cases for people who are losing their job for administrative reasons. But some people were refusing to change the names of colleagues. So if people weren't respecting the rights of other employees, those people would be fired. So there are real issues, you know, and when we're talking about client services as well. So we need to address these issues in the workplace. So yes, people have to be able to make complaints, but education is key. Mylène, I just have a quick question for you. Now, your organization groups you have 80 member groups. So when CSIS came out with its alert that there was dangers, how did your organizations prepare for that? And what did you recommend that each group do in its in the immediate term? Oh, we have no time left, but okay, very quickly, please. Well, we were expecting it. It wasn't. We didn't need to gather. We were already experiencing it. So,
Emanuela, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. I'll begin by saying, Zip, I think you're extremely brave. Thank you so much for sharing. And I was also a high school teacher. I taught Sec 1, grade 7. So you remind me of my students, and I'm very proud of you for being here today. So I have a question for you, actually. You mentioned in your testimony that this hate that the 2S LGBTQI plus community is facing is a distraction. You said that it's being used kind of as a distraction more than anything, and I'm curious to see if you can maybe elaborate a little bit on that point.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is that we honestly shouldn't be discussing this. Hear me out. Because it should just be our rights. That's basically it. So the time that it's just that they're like, oh yeah, they just starting it is kind of once, because inflation has been getting bad and all that stuff has been getting really bad, and then they start basically putting it onto the queer communities.
That's very wise of you to say. And actually, there's a lot of instances in history where the same thing has happened, right? Where an economic crisis or people not feeling secure in their own homes or in their own lives begin to use a scapegoat, right? And it's a different community, not always the same people that are being targeted, but right now, this community is one of the main targets. And usually, unfortunately, certain political parties, even historically, have used this hatred to their advantage and have used this in order to gain points. Unfortunately, that has been the case in this country as well. And what would you like to say to those politicians who have used that? To, let's say, the leader of the opposition, the official opposition, who refused to go to the flag-raising ceremony last year, who literally came out saying that there shouldn't be gender-neutral washrooms. So what would you say to a leader like that who is inciting this kind of hate?
That is a really good question. I just need a second to think. So, if some leader was like him, is, in my opinion, saying there should be no gender-neutral bathrooms is the equivalent of saying there should be no men bathrooms. There should be no women's bathrooms, which is problematic in the way that people would get upset with me saying that, but at the same time, they are saying there shouldn't be gender-neutral bathrooms because it's really where you're comfortable, and it shouldn't be like such a harsh debate. It's just being comfortable.
Thank you for sharing that. My next question is for Ms. Krause. You spoke about creating safe spaces generally, whether it's in schools, online, etc. And I'd like to pick your brain on the online portion of that. So what does that look like? How can the federal government help make those spaces safer?
Thank you through the chair. I think the really important thing is to recognize that Canadians live in small and large places, some that have more access to services that don't. So, things like providing, support online for us has really been a way to make sure that youth who live in more rural or remote areas are actually included in getting the support they need. And then it gives us an ability to look out to the community and see what might be there or the gaps that exist. I think the biggest thing, that one of the themes that I'm picking up from today is, isolation is also deadly. People not feeling connected is a really big deal. So, I will say that the National Action Plan and providing LGBTQ organizations with funding was really important. An LGBTQ organization in Nunavut received that funding. That's important because really so much, as we've seen listening to people like Zip, a lot of people operate in a very grassroots, in the community, not seeking sort of intervention services. So how do we really provide those opportunities for support through, whether it's through peers? I know there's been some really good work happening around mental health and peer support. Again, sort of the more rural and remote. So really looking at the people who struggle the most to get the support. And then, I think there's a big role for government in trying to help find the people who can fill those gaps. I think it's actually essential because the more we do in smaller centers, the more we recognize that the education isn't necessarily there, but most importantly, the supports and services really do not exist.
Thank you. MP Ferrari, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for everybody. If you can just show me, like, through a nod of hands or a wave up, how many of the clients that you work with or advocate for have been victims of crime? Okay. Okay. So for the people who put their hands up, I guess I'll go to Mylene first. Was the abuser or the person who attacked your client, was there any charges laid? What happened criminally to that person?
There's a number of cases. Thank you for your question. So there's a number of cases. There were people who were victims of crime but didn't want to go to police. We talked about violence and police and the distrust in police. Some people undertook legal proceedings, but those ended for various reasons. So that's a lot of the people that I've dealt with. That's their situation.
I'll be more specific. Have any of your clients been victims of crime where there was criminal charges laid?
No.
No. Not specifically, no.
Okay. So when we talk about hate crime, okay, I'll leave that because I think a big piece of this study is sort of looking at the justice system and how we sort of stop crime. But I guess what I'll do is I'll go back to a piece of legislation that I think can help a lot of folks, because I think right now what's happening is we're having a lot of issues online in particular, and predators, people who are particularly targeting children. And I want to just put on the record Bill C-412 again, and I think it might be of interest to a lot of the witnesses here, that it would put on a duty of care for social media platforms, but as well it would allow judges to release the name of the person who was sharing intimate images or sharing images without consent. And I guess my question to you then would be, would you support a bill like that? If there could be like a show of hands or a nod, I think that helps. No comments. What about, I can't see your name down in the corner. I believe it's Jason? Mr. Sorry? Schilling. Mr. Schilling. Are you seeing this in terms of the schools? Obviously, the kids are using a lot of social media platforms. Are you seeing an increase in sort of sextortion or kids being at risk of shared intimate personal images?
It's not necessarily the kind of data or information that we would secure as the Alberta Teachers Association. That would be more within the realms of police and RCMP that would deal with those. But we are seeing, through the last several years, an increase in terms of bullying around the use of social media. We just passed a cell phone policy here within the province of Alberta, and part of that cell phone policy is to limit the use of social media sites on school Wi-Fi, but that doesn't prevent kids from going onto their own data and using their data that way. So that's it's looking at ways to educate students around if they are being targeted, what that looks like, what are the signals of that, how is that happening, who to turn to, who to talk to, and to make sure that we are getting opportunities for kids to get that kind of education that's really important. And that's one of our concerns about the legislation that passes here, and opting in and being able to see potentially that there could be a censorship on the kind of materials that are presented to kids with the knowledge that they need to know about how it affects their lives.
Thanks. I'm all done. Thank you.
MP Surratt, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start. We spoke earlier about. Okay, Mr. Tremblay, you said, and I'll take your words. You gave examples of public discourse from members of Parliament that contribute to hatred towards the community. Could you give us more details on that? Well, that was part of the recommendations to avoid public position taking that could feed hatred or incite hatred. And so my idea is that, is based on Quebec's experience. In Quebec, we've seen, I'm going to repeat what Mylène was saying. We're talking about non-gender we talked more about non-gender washrooms than the lack of teachers. So political partners talked about this issue at length without really understanding it. So politicians are talking about equality, but every day when a politician speaks, they have a social duty, a social responsibility to be aware that what they say will be repeated. And so they can give legitimacy to positions that incite hatred. So, for example, not accepting trans women in sports, for example, refusing hormone blockers to youth who are questioning. So there are a number of statements being made publicly, that legitimize positions that support the exclusion of trans people. Thank you.
For what you do as a teacher and president of the association, but I wanted you to comment on, because during the discussion about how political ideology are influencing like universities, public schools, the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, noted that he had supported two conservative premiers, obviously Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, who had implemented provincial policies requiring principals and teachers to inform parents. This is where we heard this clearly today, and to get their consent of the children and opt to the change of pronouns and naming them in school. So that is saying that a political leader that is aspiring to be prime minister of this country supports these laws that the provincial government is putting in place. Can you comment on that, please?
It's a really good question. It's a good point, and I think Zip, who has spoken so well today, sort of hinted on this as well. Part of our commentary around Bill 27 and the other legislation that has been passed here in Alberta is the fact that we need to depoliticize this issue. This shouldn't be something that is discussed by politicians in the legislature. This is a private, complex, nuanced conversation between children, their parents, and their medical doctors. I've said it before many times here within the media that this is a sledgehammer approach to a really delicate situation that we need to ensure that our students and their families have the supports. And quite honest, we were lacking funding around mental health supports and other supports for families within our community. So I think this is something that needs to be taken out of the realm of the legislature.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, and we have Conservative members here that are very supportive, but the questions here that we're looking at is the political leader that are making these comments. And Mr. Dyer, can you comment on that also as a parent or also part of the association, how political leadership is making a difference and influencing some of that hate?
Yeah, like I said in my introduction, your queerness or your transness shouldn't really be a political issue. That's one. And then two, hate doesn't come out from nowhere. And so when political leaders make comments like this, we're inciting hate. And the public that is following you would follow suit with what you're saying. So we all just need to be careful with how we speak on this matter. It really shouldn't be a conversation. The medical professionals have said what is right, and this is evidence-based, right? And so we can just follow suit with what they're saying with the parent and the child. At the end of the day, our utmost priority should be the happiness and the survival of that child.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputy LaRouche, you have the floor for 2.5.
MP LaRouche, you have 2.5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je sais qu'on parle beaucoup de prévention. J'espère avoir le temps.
We're talking a lot about prevention, but I hope that we can, and I hope we can come back to that. But there's a question that was broached with Mr. Tremblay. The question of trust in police, and I'd like to come back to that. Even Mylène talked about the question that that there's misogyny and homophobic statements being made. So what we have to do is we have to rebuild the trust. So yes, there's prevention that has to be done, but people have to feel that they can go and make a complaint to police. So are there experiences in Quebec that we can base on? So rebuilding confidence or trust is, are there things from the Quebec experience that we can use as well so that people can regain trust in the system? I see Mylène nodding her head as well, but Quebec has dealt with trust with the legal system in terms of domestic violence involving women. And so they decided to kind of look at it by creating a specialized court, by training the judges and the police officers. And so they provide people that accompany these victims so that there's somebody that can support these people in the healthcare system and in the legal system. So people that these people can rely on. And I think that's an important thing. It's important to have support when you make a complaint that really deals with your core identity. And then when you're dealing with a person in a position of authority, I think that's an important consideration. All right. All right, I have about 15, 20 seconds left. So Mylène, do you want to add anything since you were nodding your head? I just want to remind people that Canada ratified the International Convention on the Child, which obligates the state to protect the children from all forms of discrimination.
et de la posture et du positionnement.
So we have to keep that in mind.
Merci. MP Kazan, you
Thank you.
So my last question is for you, Zip. And when I grow up, I want to be just like you, but I have, so I'll never be as good as you. But I will quote you. How do you like that? Okay. You said before the last quote, you said, "At what point do I go from being someone you protect to someone who is a threat? Not based on my heart or any of my actions, but just based on my genitalia and your ignorant ideas of what you think who I am." You said that. What can you expand on that?
Yes, I can. That was a while ago. When I said that, it was talking about bathrooms and stuff, and how trans women shouldn't be allowed to go into women's bathrooms because of misinformation of intentions, which is, in my opinion, ridiculous. So what I meant by that was that because I am a kid, there are laws that you should protect me. I'm a child. So at what point does it go from me being someone that has rights and should be protected to someone who is wrong and shouldn't be allowed to be in a comfortable space? Like, not based on anything I've done.
So this is a really, because I think it's quite a stupid discussion, Zip. Like, what's the big deal about having a gender neutral washroom? Like, why is this a topic of discussion? You said it was stupid, right? I'm using the word stupid. I'm using a more of an aggressive. I think it's quite stupid, and I'm wondering what the hysteria is about a toilet. Like, I'm wondering why there's so much focus on a toilet.
Mm-hmm.
How does that make you feel, the hysteria around a toilet? Like, it's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's the way our society has built it, that toilets are gendered, makes it so it's harder to break free of that, since we have literally built our society on toilets are gendered, separate, and should be separate at all times.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, if you would like to finish that
No,
sentence.
no, I'm fine.
Okay. Thank you. Dominique, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
Dominic, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dave, I'm coming back to you. Mr. Tremblay. So I'm calling on our Quebecers tonight. So Ms. Krause, she developed she talked a little bit about the rural world. In my riding, I have a large rural segment.
Gens qui appartiennent à la communauté LGBT.
There are, and of course, there are people who are in the LGBT community. In my riding, I know people who have transitioned in our villages and towns. And I'm not always sure that they have access to services. You know, when you're in south of Bellechasse, you're not like in Quebec City or Lévis, and you know the areas that I'm talking about. I think Mylène is not in the Quebec City region, but Mr. Tremblay, you are. So is the situation described in the study about violence? Is it even more of an issue in the rural areas? Do they have less access to services? What do you know, I'm from the Saguenay region myself. So it's a smaller region in northern Quebec. And yes, there are fewer organizations, or even inexistent in some cases, in the Lac Saint-Jean area. I know there's University 02. That's an organization that's quite recent. I know in Témiscamingue, there's another organization as well. Things are starting up. But these are often organizations that have limited capacity, and they're doing their best with volunteers to support people. But often the result is that LGBT people leave regions, and it's a self-sustaining phenomenon.
Vers des plus grands centres.
People decide to go to a larger center where there are services. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. And even in Quebec City, we don't have a lot of organizations. I think there are 4 or 5 of them. In the Montreal region, I don't know, there may be 50 or 60 or hundreds of them. So it's disproportionate. You know, there's a disproportion between rural organizations and the bigger cities. Thank you, Dave. Mylène, you're an associate research at the Raoul Durand Institute. We've been talking a lot about that institute in recent times. So you're interested in gender-related issues with and the Maghreb. Somebody came to talk to us and who was from Tunisia, and he was saying that it wasn't easy in the Maghreb region, and he eventually made his way to Canada. I think he feels comfortable in Quebec and in Canada. But so you know the Maghreb world and Canada. So compared to other countries, is Canada not a welcoming place for these people where they can live? Is it right to think that way? I think we have more rights and freedoms, but I think we have to look at the retreat of rights that's taking place as well. I think the situations are complex. The immigration process, results in a loss of community. And sometimes LGBT people from the regions come into the city or in the regions might feel more connected than they do in the larger urban centers. And I think that might be the case for immigrants as well. You know, I lived in Morocco for a number of years, and I know people in Quebec who have experienced racism and Islamophobia in the LGBT community. So the feeling, they have a sense that they don't belong. And, so yes, we have more freedom, but there are difficulties as well. Dave.
Puis Mylène aussi.
Do you remember story time lors du compte in Quebec? And, drag queens in certain municipalities or community centers, I don't remember. People were inviting, or community organizations were inviting drag queens to do story time, and there were protests. There were, I won't go into the detail. I'm not going to blame anybody, but did this surprise you? Is it not an indication? And and I've had discussions with people who are close to me, and it was very, people of the same age in their 30s. Some people were for, some people were against, but it was very black and white. Does that surprise you? The scope, yeah, it does. I would have thought that, naively, that there would be less of a reaction. But there was a position that was tabled at the Legislative Assembly that got tens of thousands of signatures to put an end to the practice. And it was there was a lot of misinformation. Some people thought that we were promoting homosexuality. We were encouraging young people to become trans or homosexual. So again, a lot of misinformation. We've been talking about this since the beginning. And there were demonstrations that took place, So there was so the Legislative Assembly had to kind of reiterate its trust in Barbara, a famous Quebec drag queen who is also a teacher. She's an elementary school teacher. She's used to working with young children, and she's a very good communicator. So there was a lot of disinformation. Right. Thank you, Dave.
Round 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. This has been a super conversation. Pam, I really appreciate that you brought up how impactful the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence has been 1 year in, and it's really gratifying to hear that it's already having an impact on the ground. Ms. DK Hart, did I pronounce that correctly? I was listening carefully when you introduced yourself. I believe that your organization recently received some wage funding also in order to try and fight the rising hate against the 2S LGBTQI plus community. Would you tell us more about what your organization is planning to do with that funding? I think it was about $366,000.
Yes. So once we're done with negotiation, we're hitting the ground running. One of the first things that we're doing is we are creating like a workshop for conversion therapy victims. This workshop would help them understand their rights from a legal standpoint, while also understanding how to care for themselves from a mental health standpoint. So we're going to be collaborating with professionals in that field to do that. Another thing that we're trying to do is to ensure that we keep the history of the Black 2S LGBTQ community alive by ensuring that we implement an online archive of Black 2S LGBTQ historians, so people who, I guess, are older and have experienced the change of how the Black queer community changed from pre our rights to now that we have the rights, and what it was like living in the 60s and things like that, just so that we tell our stories by ourselves, and the younger generation can see what it was like to be Canadian at the time. It's very essential because Canada was one of the first countries to actually the first in North America to legalize same-sex marriage, and we should be pioneers of this. And so sometimes it feels like we're going back as opposed to going forward. So it's very painful that we have to do the work to ensure that people know this is the journey. Another thing that we're also trying to do is to work with other professionals, researchers, to understand people within the community, see exactly what the discrimination looks like. What hate are you facing on the ground? And that way we can come up with different strategies on how to bridge that gap and ensure that you feel like you're safe and secure as a Black 2S LGBTQ member of community. So these are just a few of the ways that we're going to be kicking off in January all the way to 2027.
Amazing. It's really important work, and I thank you very much for that work. I'm going to go over back to Mr. Schilling, Jason Schilling. You're in Alberta, right?
I am.
When we talk about the activists who are against transgender people and the sorts of legislation that we're seeing in places like Alberta, I hear a lot that teachers are being blamed for this, and that's why it seems to me that provincial governments are attacking the school system and the way the schools run when they're taking up these anti-trans agendas. Is that fair to put it on teachers, or do you know what I'm talking about? Have you felt this as well? Do you feel like you are taking the weight of this, kind of?
That's a great question, and to a certain degree, yes. I mean, we had a protest just outside of our headquarters here in Edmonton at Barnett House last year with sort of a let kids be kids kind of thing. I think it was called the Million March for Children that happened across Canada. So it was here, and it was a lot of lies, accusations, mistruths about what's happening in schools. And, you know, to counter that, we have a curriculum that is approved by government with resources that are approved by government that teachers teach in schools. Simple conversations between parents and teachers and schools about what is happening is really what needs to be there. And a lot of my colleagues I talk to are frustrated by the fact that, you know, sometimes we will hear lies that are perpetuated by candidates who want to run for political parties, that we're showing pornography in schools, that schools have kitty litter boxes in them. Like all of these things that that are not true, but perpetuate misinformation, and then you see online hatred in that as well. I mean, I don't know I've lost track of how many times I've been called a groomer and a pedophile on social media, just for the simple fact that, I'm a teacher and I'm standing up for my colleagues around the protection of our most vulnerable youth. And so teachers do feel the weight of that, and that's why they're concerned about the legislation that's going forward.
Sorry, I'm out of time, but that's really important evidence. Jason, thank you very much for sharing.
You're welcome.
That does conclude our panel for today. And on behalf of the committee, I would also like to acknowledge a heartfelt thank you for being here with us today. And those of you that are online, thank you for your time. At this point, just a few notes for the committee. Monday, we will have another meeting continuing this study. And then from there, moving into January, be mindful that the committee work will begin with consideration of version 1 of the report on coercive control. And what will happen is the report will be distributed to committee members a week before our return, so that you will have an opportunity to review it. And then additionally, the committee will be juggling a few different things when we're back, a combination of wrapping up the study on 2S LGBTQ. Oh, yes?
I had a stakeholder in Hamilton reach out to me today who would really like to participate in this study. I can forward her contact information to the clerk. If we have room for one more witness, I'd really love to get her in.
Sure, if you could be in contact with the...
I'll do that today. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we this one, yes. Yeah. Okay.
We can still take witnesses? I thought we were cut off.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, they are added to the bottom, so there's no certainty that they will be there, but they can certainly be added. So just going back to what I was suggesting, so we are going to be juggling come the new year, wrapping up the study on the 2S LGBTQI+, and then in addition, we will be beginning the institutional mother-child program study amidst consideration of reports before an order for new studies is established. So we will be juggling a little bit come January or February, but that's what we're used to. In addition, you can advise the committee. Okay, let me look here. There will be a draft proposed schedule for the new year coming out that you can all anticipate as well. But other than that, seeing no questions, thank you again to our witnesses. Meeting adjourned.